Coming up on America's Hope, the New Hampshire primary is now history. So what's next for the Republican frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, and his challenger, Nikki Haley? We'll break it all down with Republican and Democrat political insiders, former Republican presidential candidate Larry Elder, and analyst Denise Grace Gitsham, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeever, and journalist Julian Phillips. They join us next on America's Hope.
America's Hope is brought to you by Birch Gold Group, the precious metals IRA specialists. Text Kelly to 989898.
We win it every time. We win the primary, we win the generals, we've won it, and it's a very, very special place to me. It's very important. Thank you very much. We love you. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. We'll see you on the trail. And thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
I want to congratulate Donald Trump on his victory tonight. He earned it, and I want to acknowledge that. They're falling all over themselves, saying this race is over. It's not over. Well, I have news for all of them. New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over. There are dozens of states left to go. And the next one is my sweet state of South Carolina.
Donald Trump celebrating his victory in New Hampshire, and Nikki Haley vowing to remain in the race to win the Republican presidential nomination. Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope. We've got some great political insiders joining us this evening to discuss what now takes place beyond New Hampshire. Joining us this evening, Denise Grace Gitsham, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeever, journalist Julian Phillips, and former Republican presidential candidate Larry Elder. Let's get started. And I'm joined now by my good friend and a colleague and friend to this program, America's Hope, Denise Grace Gitsham. She is the author of Politics for People Who Hate Politics. She is also a political analyst and attorney, and she worked with the Bush administration with the incredible Karl Rove. Denise, thank you for joining us this day.
Thank you so much for having me on, Kelly.
It's always a pleasure. You always bring it with conversations that are real. So give me the real Denise Grace Gitsham analysis of New Hampshire as it relates to Nikki Haley and Donald Trump.
So I may be a bit biased in this perspective, but my very first ever primary where I was very involved in politics was when I was 22 years old, and I was on the George W. Bush campaign, Governor George W. Bush campaign in Austin, Texas, working for Karl Rove. And we went in with so much energy and excitement, and this was January of 2000, and we were running against John McCain as our primary opponent. And we lost by 18 percentage points. I will never forget the feeling, the somber atmosphere that just completely pervaded the campaign headquarters, the number of resumes that were being sent out from our office. People just thought it was over. And I remember thinking, gosh, we had all these poll numbers that were looking so great for us. What has New Hampshire done? And so ever since then, I've had sort of a cynicism about that state, and partly because I went to college in Maine and I know New Hampshire, New England pretty well. There's just a different kind of people. This has really now become, and even the Biden election has doubled down on Donald Trump, Biden rematch. And so let's learn a couple lessons from New Hampshire, because what we saw is that a lot of independents, or at least undeclared voters, aren't sure that they want the kind of personality. They may love the policies, but they're still unconvinced that Donald Trump is the person for them that they want back in the Oval Office.
So with that being said, what does Donald Trump have to do in order to win over independents as well as those Democrats who are not happy with Joe Biden?
Well, what we saw last night coming out of New Hampshire, for the first time, I saw the economy being, no pun intended, trumped by immigration as the top issue in New Hampshire voters' minds, which is so fascinating for someone like me from California, an actual border state who's lived in Texas, California. So how does that affect the general election? Well, so one thing Donald Trump has been masterful in, and he's so good at gauging the temperature of in the room. He knows, he's got his fingers on the pulse of voters, and he knows where he can pick up voters that are disaffected that might otherwise go for Biden. You saw that in East Palestine, his resurrection. That was really the beginning of his campaign back in February of 2023. And you saw that people just wanted to be noticed, the pain that to pull a Clinton line, he felt their pain. And people in New Hampshire are now feeling the pain somehow of what used to just be a border state problem in immigration. So the more Donald Trump continues to really tap into the people and sort of ignore the more fringe issues, and I'm not calling these fringe because they don't matter, and that's a really tough haul for Biden. President Biden has failed on the economy. He's a complete disaster on immigration, more so even than the economy, if I can say that. And on the issues of abortion, that's probably going to be in the plus column for him amongst undecided voters or people who don't share my convictions. They're really going to be fighting for things like having a woman's right to choose. And so those aren't going to be the things, however, that actually motivate people to cast a vote for him.
Denise, let me take a break. When I come back on the other side of the break, I want to talk to you about the temperature. If we can read the temperature among the American people in terms of divisiveness over politics.
Yeah.
Talking to Denise Grace Gitsham. We'll be back in just a moment on America's Hope. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm joined by Denise Grace Gitsham, who is the author of Politics for People Who Hate Politics, and of course a political analyst, an attorney, worked with Karl Rove and the Bush administration. You've been there for quite a while. What would you say is the temperature or the tone of the American people who are divided over Trump and Biden?
Everything. They're divided about everything. And I think what you're seeing, I mean, even Biden within his own party, there's division. I mean, there's intra-party fighting within the Republicans between moderates or what people call rhinos and versus the MAGA, like diehard. And so you've got just so many factions, even within the parties. You've got the pro-Israel and the not Hamas, but pro-Palestinian sort of resistance within the Democratic Party. I mean, Joe Biden can't have a speech publicly without protesters showing up anymore. And so there's just everyone's upset about everything. And this is reflected in the polls that have consistently shown for over a year and a half now that 70 to 80% of Americans believe our country is on the wrong track. All of it, these sorts of issues, when you have that kind of discontent, it's a latent, and now it's more and more expressed content, but it's just persistent, coupled with the fact that Americans are just struggling to survive economically. They're feeling like they're just being attacked on all sides and that nobody is really standing up and giving them a voice or standing up for them and fighting for them. This is Donald Trump's moment to step in and be that savior, that hero. That is exactly what you're seeing in these polls where you've got Democrats, and not a huge number, but what you're seeing is a shift from even folks who are traditional Democrats, what we think of the African-American community and the Latino community, and even younger voters are shifting away from sort of the more milquetoast, let's go along to get along kind of perspective. What you see in Joe Biden as the nice guy. And they're saying, look, we really like being nice when we can afford to do that. But now we need someone who can actually take the reins and being the grown up in the room. And, we can argue amongst ourselves as to whether Donald J. Trump ends up being labeled the grown up in the room, just in terms of his rhetoric, but in terms of his convictions and how strongly he stands for the things that he says he stands for and his ability to follow through. I think people just want someone who just displays leadership with a certain level of certainty and really not caring what the rest of the world thinks, because he's going to do what he's going to follow through on what he's promised.
Yeah. So when we look at this divide among the American people and this angst that is so palpable, are many American people throwing their hands up in the air? And because of that, do you think they will even show up to vote in a general election?
They're just angry with the way things are going in America. And you don't have to love politics. In fact, you probably hate politics because of it. But when you hate it that much, you feel compelled to do something. You feel compelled to be kicked into action. And whatever your motivating factor is, whether it's hatred of the other side, which is so unfortunate because I really do believe that poses an existential threat to our nation, or it's really a love for your country, or even a sense of injustice, like you just want to fight for justice for what you think is right. Those are all good and bad depending on how we express those feelings. But at the end of the day, I would just really love to caution what I know this, you share my feelings on this, is it is still our job to love one another, even in the midst of us speaking our truth, in the midst of all the heightened emotions. As Christians, as you and I are Christians, our job is to love one another and be honorable in the way that we engage in our political just process.
I have to agree with you on that.
About candidates, right?
And you see the threat to America right now from our foreign adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, which is, attacking our forces in Iraq and other places throughout the Middle East. What is your hope for America to get through this divisive, tough and grueling political state that we're going through right now because of the presidential campaign? And how do we get to that place where we can take care of each other?
We have to be careful that we don't mischaracterize people that we have maybe just a little bit of disagreement on, but it seems so much bigger in the midst of a political election, especially one as important as this one, that we don't forget that at the end of the day, a house divided cannot stand. Abraham Lincoln said it, but it was in scripture first. And if we don't recognize that division is actually our greatest threat, if we're not able to unify and together fight against the external forces that are coming against America, then we're never going to be able to stand as a nation. Let's look for what we have in common, agree to disagree, don't feed the division and the hatred, and still stand for truth while speaking it in love. I think that that's probably the hardest thing for me to do, Kelly. Honestly, it's so hard for me in the middle of heightened emotions, but I think I ask the Lord every single day to just help me to speak the truth and love God. And that's the only thing that keeps me sane in this election season. So that'd be my best advice to your listeners and your viewers.
That's great therapy for the mind, body, and the spirit of the American people. I hope people can appreciate all that you are discussing. And you said we have to agree to disagree. And I like to add to that and learn to live in harmony, despite our differences. Yeah. Denise Grace Gitsham, always a pleasure to have you on, my friend. Thank you.
I love being on with you, Kelly.
All right. God bless you.
You too. Take care. Have a great day.
We're back with more in just a moment. And before we go to break, a quick word about our sponsor. As we head toward a presidential election in November, one thing you can be sure of, 2024 will be a tumultuous year. How will your hard-earned savings fare? You already see the impacts of inflation at the pump, the grocery store. The dollar continues to lose buying power quicker than wages can increase. How are you protecting your savings? Well, consider diversifying with gold from Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold has been the choice of investors and central banks to hedge against inflation. Well, now you can own it in a tax-sheltered IRA with the help of Birch Gold. Just text Kelly to 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. They'll even help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. And the best part, you don't have to pay a penny out of pocket. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of satisfied customers, you can trust Birch Gold. Text to 989898 to claim your free info kit. Again, text to Kelly to 989898 and secure your savings now. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright. I'm joined now by Dr. Avis Jones DeWeever. And Avis has more than 20 years of research, advocacy, and evaluation experience. She is president and CEO of Insight Unlimited, which is a consulting firm devoted to the principle of moving great ideas to effective action. She also held positions in the governor's office of Virginia, the Maryland State House of Representatives, and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And most recently, she served as the executive director of the National Council of Negro Women, leading that organization at a particular crucial moment in history following the death of civil rights and women's rights icon, Dr. Dorothy Height. Avis, it's an honor to have you on the show tonight on America's Hope.
It is such an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, with your list of credits and things that you've accomplished, one could arguably say that you understand politics better than most people on the outside looking in. There are some people who actually hate where we are politically in this country because it divides us. Give me your assessment of what happened in New Hampshire, and going forward, what does Nikki Haley face and what does Donald Trump face as the front runner?
Absolutely. So New Hampshire takes great pride in being that first primary in the nation. And the people there, I believe, relish the moment to be able to move in the way that they want to move and not necessarily in the way that the pundits predict that they will move, right? And so I think what we saw happened with this particular primary was, though the outcome was much like many would have expected in terms of the winner and the person who came in second, that the distance between the two, I believe, was a little bit unexpected. Prior to that particular primary, we saw polls that suggested that Nikki Haley should have lost by much more than she actually did. And strategically, her coming out when she did and kind of the concession that was not really a concession, helped to give her campaign a little bit of life moving into South Carolina and beyond. So I think that she overperformed what many people thought she would. And for her, that's at least a symbolic win.
Symbolic win. Nevertheless, she faces a challenge yet again in South Carolina, which is coming up. It's her home state where she served as governor, and yet she's trailing in the polls behind the frontrunner, Donald Trump, who is the former president of the United States. How can she hope to garner that support, particularly given the fact that the man she gave the Senate to, which is Tim Scott, is now endorsing the former president of the United States?
Oh my goodness, you hit the nail on the head there. South Carolina actually is going to be, I believe, much more difficult for her than New Hampshire was, even though that is her home state, even though that is the state where she was the governor. She comes in there in a much more, I would say, highly conservative primary pool. As we know, in New Hampshire, it's an open primary, and it famously is very, very open, the fact that a lot of independents like to make their voices known on that day. And when we look at the exit polls from New Hampshire, we saw that a lot of her support was garnered by independents, and maybe even a few that maybe thought of themselves as Democrats, even if they weren't registered as Democrats. In the South, even though technically in South Carolina, even though technically it's an open primary, traditionally it's primarily Republicans that show up and very conservative Republicans. It's a much more difficult landscape for her. And unfortunately for her, I don't expect her to be anywhere near as close to Donald Trump as she was in the New Hampshire outcome.
She has to be wondering why she should stay in.
Absolutely. I think in many ways, obviously, it would be politically embarrassing to lose in your home state. She might want to consider a number of different factors. Does she want to consider what might be her future if she wants to run again in the next cycle? And if that's the case, does it make sense even for her to bow out before she gets trounced in her home state? She has said right now that she's determined to do it. In fact, she said right now that she wants to go through Super Tuesday. But I believe the real decider here is the pockets. Is she going to have the money past South Carolina if she ends up losing as badly as many of us believe that she will? Particularly, as you mentioned, having that almost kind of stake in her heart with having Tim Scott endorse Donald Trump right before the primary in New Hampshire. So she's in this space where she's moving into very difficult circumstances. If she loses really badly there and she begins to have impacts on her funding, I don't know if it'll be possible for her to get to Super Tuesday. I think ultimately her goal is to try to stay in this long enough to see if some intervening factor happens with one of these 90-some counts, or if something happens that is an outlier event that would hurt him tragically, and then she would be that last alternative standing. But I don't know if she'll be able to last even that.
Yeah, you're speaking of the president's legal woes, obviously, and if something goes wrong and he should get some sort of conviction, you're thinking that maybe she would like to step in at that time and be the front runner?
Yes, I think she's hoping for some sort of outside intervention, shall we say, because really that's what would be necessary for her to win this nomination. The bottom line is, like it or not, this really is Trump's party at this point.
But in a general election, what does the former president of the United States face in his battle against Joe Biden?
Well, his biggest challenge in the general election is that the entire country will be voting and not just the right wing of the Republican Party, which, not to denigrate the Republican Party, but it's just the nature of primaries that you tend to have the most extreme wings of each party that come out in force during primary seasons. And so when he is the person that is the standard bearer for his party and the entire electorate can vote, including independents, including Democrats, including more moderate Republicans, that's where he begins to run into challenges. Now, the thing that is helping him, interestingly, is that, we have a situation where President Biden is having problems with his base, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of the foreign policy dynamics that are going on right now, not the least of which is the war with Israel and Hamas and the implications on Palestinians that many people are completely outraged by that are part of the Democratic base. So in many ways, this is going to be a war of the strength of the bases, as well as the degree to which those who are independents are able to come out in force, or if people are turned off altogether by all the shenanigans and decide to stay at home. This will be a very, very, honestly, less predictable than I think for example, the Democrats would like to see. I think they might be beginning to worry right now, and for good reason, if they don't shore up their base.
Let's talk about young America, for example, Gen Z. Many of them are looking at this president and saying, nah, I don't think so. They're looking at Trump and say, well, maybe. And they have issues with voting. And then there's the black vote. We're not sure what side African Americans will choose. Talk to me from the perspective of what you think black women are looking at with regard to either or, Trump or Biden.
Absolutely. So black women are a very, very pragmatic voting bloc. They are looking at the bottom line, like what is going to be the impact of this election on my pocketbook, in my family, on my housing costs, if my health care, all of those things. And being very pragmatic, black women have been very, very loyal to the Democratic Party, understanding that it's not perfect, but when comparing it to the alternative, that really is the base of the base for the Democratic Party. The big question is when you disperse that out generationally, we don't see that same sort of conditioning, shall we say, with younger black women. So that age issue, that generational dynamic is true even for the most loyal segment of the Democratic Party. And so to me, Joe Biden really has to be very careful in his messaging. He has to go out there and let people understand that not only is he fighting for them, that he has delivered certain things for them that they sort of fought for when he first received their vote. He needs to remind them of the things that have happened that they asked for, and that because of their pressure, he delivered. But also he needs to be able to start to create a very stark contrast between what a second term of a Biden administration would look like and what it would look like to take the White House and hand it back to a Trump administration, and what would be at stake if that happens.
As you know, Trump is gaining some ground among some black voters, Republican black voters, but he's also gaining some ground among black men who are looking at him and saying, well, I think he might be the better of the two candidates. Talk to me about that dynamic and what, if anything, can the former president of the United States do to capitalize upon that, given the fact that Tim Scott, a senator from South Carolina, could likely be a front runner for perhaps a vice presidential nod?
Absolutely. I do believe that it was a very strategic move to garner the endorsement of Tim Scott, not only because he got that right before the South Carolina primary, but it would be especially smart I'll just say, if he were to consider him strongly for a vice president and to have him on the ticket, because that might be just enough to make more Black men actually come out and support. We know that in the last election, he did make some headway in terms of the Black male demographic, just in terms of expressed support. Maybe not all of them showed up to the degree that people were expecting, but perhaps if he continues down that line by saying, okay, not only am I someone who has a lot of bravado, someone who has the type of character or saying those types of things that make you feel like I'm fighting for you. But for right now, there is a small but loud segment, I believe, specifically in the Black community, that is seriously considering Trump. And to their credit, I would say, to the Trump campaign's credit, I am literally seeing more activity from that campaign, reaching out to Black voters via social media activity. And so they are working for that vote. That is absolutely clear, and it's fair game. So if I were advising the Biden administration out, for example, I would say you need to be working at least as hard as your competitor for this vote that you know you need, because this is not the time to take them for.
Dr. Avis Jones DeWeever, appreciate you. Thank you for being on America's Hope.
Thank you for having me.
We're back with more in just a moment. All right, joining me now is Julian Phillips. He's an Emmy award-winning journalist, 3 Emmys to be exact, and a lot more. He has worked at NBC and Fox News. He is the host and creator of the political talk show On Point, and he has a very unique and entertaining political show that gives you a lot of insight. It's called Eat and Argue. Entertaining, you got to see it. Also, he is my friend and former colleague from our days at Fox News. Julian, good to see you.
It is really good to see you, Kelly. You're getting younger and younger all the time.
See, compliments will get you everywhere. But look, compliments go to Donald Trump, one would say, because he handedly defeated Nikki Haley in New Hampshire. And of course, it comes as no surprise. But the question is, what happens beyond New Hampshire? Can Nikki Haley ever hope to accomplish any victory against the former president of the United States, particularly in her home state of South Carolina, which is coming up with the South Carolina primary?
You know, pollsters would probably say, and I would agree, that it seems a daunting task, if not impossible. You know, you never know what happens, but you know, basically, when you look at the states, you've got Super Tuesday coming up. You know, Trump is ahead by all margins in double digits, but there may be other reasons why she's staying in this. She says she will vow to fight on. I think there are reasons for it.
Some people are watching to see what's going to happen to the former president with his legal troubles, which are still out there.
Yeah, I think so. Some might suggest that, you know, one of these 4 trials may take place prior to the convention. I think the one that is foremost in front would probably be the one in Georgia, the racketeering trial down there. That has its problems as well. But if that's the case, that might open the door for Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and maybe even Chris Christie to resurface if that's the case.
So, what does the Donald, as we used to call him, and we were reporters here in New York City when he was just Donald Trump, the successful businessman, what does he have to do in a general election against the incumbent president, Joe Biden?
Well, you know, it's not going. People are predicting. I'm not so sure how close this will be. It's going to be a daunting task because here's the deal with Haley. She might want to stay in this to make sure that the Republican Party doesn't galvanize totally around Donald Trump. If that's the case, that might cause him problems. You know, he wants, and you know, a number of people in the Republican Party want this thing to be over with so he can concentrate one-on-one with Joe Biden. If that's not the case, that might cause problems for Trump.
Julian, look, I want to take you back to Biden's foreign policy. When he came into office, he said he was going to heal the soul of America. And then there was that precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Did that turn the tide on how people support or had supported Joe Biden with regard to foreign policy? There's Afghanistan, and now there's, of course, Ukraine and Russia, and then Israel and Hamas and the Palestinian issue that's come up from that.
Well, you know, let's dissect it as quickly as we can. Israel and Hamas. Biden has come out strongly for Israel, to the chagrin of many of our allies and people in this country, based upon what has happened since October 7th. So, I don't know how much more support he could give to Israel in terms of what his rhetoric has been, as well as the money that we are giving to Israel in that regard. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, it was not a great pullout. I really don't know what could have been done to change that, but outside of that and overall, the one thing that's good about what I think he's done is that we have gotten a more solidified force with our NATO allies now in his support for Ukraine. There are plenty of people that think that we really need to support Ukraine because it certainly is a threat to democracy, not just over in Europe, but apparently it could be a threat to democracy here as well.
You're a man of faith, as am I. What do you think the faith perspective is in America as it relates to both of these men possibly becoming the leader of the United States and the leader of the free world?
Well, as well as I do, God raises up leaders and he brings them down. There are some people who would suggest that Trump is a God-given person. Kelly, I'm really going to have to say on this, a man who has had 91 counts, 4 indictments. I can't tell you how many sexual abuse charges against him. One that was proven in court with E. Jean Carroll, that was ruled that there was a problem there. I've got issues with that. I've got issues with character. I've got issues with, a person who insults people all the time, and we can go down the list of names. Character always comes in, and when you deal with God, God always looks at character.
And what about Joe Biden?
Well, look, what can I say about Joe? There are things that I like about Joe, and there are things that I don't like about him. But I do believe that he is a man of character. He's cared. He's talked a lot about his personal challenges that he's dealt with his family. He's lost members of his family, his wife, his son, Bo. I do believe that he does have some character. Do I believe that he may be the best person for the job? That remains to be seen.
Before I let you go, talk to me about your programs, On Point as well as Eat and Argue.
Well, here's the thing. I've been a gunslinger for both parties. I have friends, very, very good friends, in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party. I believe in the two-party system. What we're witnessing now amongst Americans is this divisiveness through party lines. So, if you're a Republican and somebody's a Democrat, you're treasonous. If you're a Democrat on the other side, and you look at a Republican, you're a fascist. This is absolutely ridiculous. We have to come together. My shows are designed to be unbiased. They're designed to give information. Eat and Argue is a show that brings the right and the left together, a Republican and a Democrat, to try to see if we can find common ground. We do not, I repeat, we do not have to agree on everything. We've never been a country that we've had to agree on everything. But we can find common ground and come together. That's what it's all about. If everybody agrees on everything, something's wrong. But we're all Americans at the end of the day. I have a bunch of people in my family who served in this military. They're liberals for the most part, but they went to fight. There are plenty of liberals who are 6 feet under, as well as conservatives who are 6 feet under, who fought and died for this country. They took up the mantle. We've got to remember that we are Americans first, and that is my hope, and that should be America's hope.
Thank you, my friend. Julian Phillips, always seeking that higher ground and common ground at that table of brotherhood. Thank you. Good to see you, man.
You're welcome, sir. Good to see you.
All right, we're coming back with more of America's Hope in just a moment. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'm joined now by former Republican presidential contender Larry Elder. He's also the author of a brand new book called As Goes California. Larry, thank you for joining America's Hope. Let's talk about the New Hampshire primary and what you see going forward beyond New Hampshire for Donald Trump and Nikki Haley.
Well, I'm going to make a bold prediction, and if I'm wrong, lose this tape. I believe that Nikki Haley, as we speak, Kelly, is thinking about dropping out for all sorts of reasons. I don't see a path forward for her. She lost New Hampshire, even though she claims that she had a really great showing. She lost by maybe 11 points, maybe even 12 points. She was endorsed by the largest newspaper. She was endorsed by the very popular governor, and she still lost. And a bunch of independents, about 43% of all the voters in New Hampshire are independents. And of course, they can vote in this primary. And about 4,000 former Democrats re-registered as Republicans or independents so they could vote against Donald Trump. Going forward, she's not even registered to run in Nevada. And in South Carolina, according to most of the polls, she's down anywhere from 20 to 40 to 50 points. So I don't see a path going forward. Also, there's this. The longer she stays in, Kelly, the more money Donald Trump has to spend in order to fight her off. And there is a bunch of negative sound bites that Joe Biden is just piling up to lay on Donald Trump in the fall when Donald Trump becomes the eventual nominee. And finally, there's this. Assuming for a moment that Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden, can you imagine what the post-mortem analysis is going to be? One of the factors as to why Donald Trump lost, pundits are going to say, is because Nikki Haley stayed in too long, cost him a lot of money, and gave a lot of opposition ammo to Joe Biden. If she wants to be viable in 2028, that's not a good look. So I don't believe she's going to stay in very long for those reasons.
All right, we're going to wait and see what happens to see if your prediction is right. But another question I want to ask you, Larry, is that you were in the room in Mar-a-Lago speaking to the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, when you told him that you were going to suspend your campaign. And then you told him something that you wanted to see him bring to the table with regard to how he's running his campaign and what he has to put out there in front of the American people. Talk to me about fatherlessness in America and why you think that is so important, and if Mr. Trump is doing what you requested of him.
Well, Kelly, that's why I ran. I didn't really believe that I was going to win the nomination. We have an America First guy, and I ran as an America First guy. But I thought even Donald Trump was ignoring what I consider to be the most pressing domestic issue in America, which is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 40% of all American kids now enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother. That's up threefold from the mid-'60s. 70% of black kids do, up threefold from the mid-'60s. Now 25% of all white kids enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother. You're far more likely to be poor, to drop out of school, to end up in jail. These are stats that are, even Barack Obama quoted these stats. And when I told Donald Trump I wanted him to emphasize this, not only did he say he would, he promptly put out a tweet and said Larry Elder has been talking about the epidemic of fatherlessness and the importance of families, and good for him for bringing this issue to the forefront. So Donald Trump has been talking about it. Vivek Ramaswamy also talked about it, having never talked about it before, and verbatim used my line, epidemic of fatherlessness. A few months ago, a left-wing columnist named Nicholas Kristof, New York Times, wrote a big column about the epidemic of fatherlessness and chastised fellow liberals for ignoring this issue. I don't believe that would have happened had Larry Elder not been on the campaign trail for several months talking about all of this.
And based on what we're seeing in the polls, Donald Trump is clearly the front runner and will likely go on to get the Republican presidential nomination, which means he would be pitted against his former adversary, the incumbent, President Joe Biden. Both of these men have to do something in terms of how they appeal to black Americans. Which of the two do you think will have more appeal, given the fact that Donald Trump is making some inroads into black American men who are looking to him as a possible person that they would vote for, and then others are just deciding they'd rather not vote at all because they're not favoring Biden or Trump?
Well, historically, blacks were Republican until the New Deal, and then it's gone up a lot more since then. But in recent months, Donald Trump's making serious impact. In 2016, he got 8% of the black vote. In 2020, he got 12%, 22% of the black male vote. And right now, it looks like he might even get 30 or 40% of the black vote. Why? Because borders were secured under Donald Trump. The people most hurt by illegal aliens are black and brown people living in the inner city with little education, high school or less. Those are the kinds of people that illegal aliens compete against for jobs. Donald Trump supports school choice, and black parents living in the inner city want school choice. 13 public high schools in Baltimore, all located in the inner city, Kelly. 0% of blacks can do math at grade level. 52 government schools in Chicago, all in the inner city. 0% can do math at grade level. Gas prices were low, inflation was low. When you're at the bottom, when prices go up, it takes a disproportionately larger percentage of your paycheck away from you. So for all these reasons, I think Donald Trump is beginning to have some appeal to black people, and black people are beginning to wake up that the Democratic Party, because of the war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson launched, has incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. I think a lot of black people are waking up for all these reasons.
Well, as you said, though, it's also black and white now. So again, getting back to the point that you've made about fatherlessness and being a campaign issue that Donald Trump should adopt, would you prefer to see both men get that issue out there front and center to the American people, and what can be done about fatherlessness in America?
Absolutely. We all ought to be talking about it. It is the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about. I think that the Democratic Party doesn't talk about it because they have to look in the mirror and recognize that they are largely responsible for it. Our side doesn't talk about it because if you're white, you'd be accused of dissing the heroic job that single moms are doing, or that you're systemically racist. And if you're black and you're talking about it, you're an Uncle Tom or a sellout, or as the LA Times called me, the black face of white supremacy. As to what should be done about it, I liken it, Kelly, to recovering alcoholics, where if you go to AA, you get a sponsor. Every single one of these kids should have a sponsor, should have a father figure. And I'm calling on all the men in my generation, the baby boomer generation. Many of us are retired. They've raised kids. They've raised grandchildren. They're still vigorous. Get involved. Reach out. Join your local church. Join your local program in your neighborhood. There are all sorts of programs. And if you can't do it by reaching out, donate money. I belong to a church out here called the Calvary Chapel Chino Hills Church. The pastor is named Jack Hills. We have a program where we go door to door, including in places like Harlem, and offer mentorships for young black men. Every single one of these kids who grow up, black men and black boys without a father, ought to be able to pick up the phone, go online, and tap into the knowledge of some sort of mentor, some sort of sponsor.
Larry Elder joining us tonight on America's Hope with a strong message about fatherlessness in America and how all Americans can actually step up to do something beyond politics and really get to the base of what he perceives as being America's most challenging issue of today. Larry Elder, thank you for being on America's Hope.
Kelly, it's my pleasure. Government can't solve this problem. It's up to us. Thank you.
All right, we'll end on that note. Coming back with more in just a moment. Larry, again, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all of our guests who appeared on tonight's program. And my final word for tonight, to sum up everything that we've heard, there's a common thread of what each of our guests have had to discuss. And that is they believe in America. And they still see America as that city on a hill, shining its light, being a beacon of hope. But we do have issues that we must deal with. But deal with from the perspective of finding common ground to build upon that hope that we share. So think about this, America, as you continue to study the people that you will undoubtedly vote for to lead this nation. Keep one thing in mind: one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Until next time. Good night. God bless.
America's Hope is brought to you by Birch Gold Group, the precious metals IRA specialists. Text Kelly to 989898.